Hello my friends all over the world, wherever you are. William Poloniak here from Whole Health Foundation, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to replace the top plate on an ordinary model juicer with a premium top plate. Now the first thing we're going to do is remove the bottom plate, but here we have a premium top plate that's totally solid and the bottom plate. So in the next video clip I'm going to take off the bottom plate and then show you how to replace the top of that video clip. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I take off the bottom plate is, first of all, I've clamped the motor so the front and back plate don't come off, because I've sent the front motor escutcheon plate off to get the corners rounded. There are 2 bolts on this side that I need to remove to take the motor out, and 2 on the other side. But before I can take off the 2 on the other side, I need to remove this piece of cardboard that's put in there to reduce vibration, and I need to remove the 2 screws that hold this divider plate on. So let's take those screws out, and there's another screw here. Are you getting a close-up of that? Good. I love the simplicity of this machine. It's very easy to service if you know what you're doing. And the next thing we need to do is get a pair of pliers, and we're going to grab that sheet metal and pull it out. Now I can access these 2 bolts, and around here you'll see 2 more bolts. Let me get a flashlight so you can see them. There you can see the 2 bolts that we have to remove on this side. And you take these bolts out and the 2 on the other side. So we'll take the motor out now, and then the next step is to remove this plate. Now you've noticed I've already got 2 of the screws out on this side, and then we'll take 2 of the screws out on the other side, remove this plate, remove the motor, and then to get the plate off we need to remove the bottom plate because we have to rotate these posts. Now I'm going to take off the upper press plate, and I've already removed 3 of the screws, and I want to point out, if any of these screws are stubborn, you can use a tall screwdriver as an impact wrench and pound it until the screw loosens, and then remove all 4 screws. And if you're lucky, you don't have to drill them out. If you have to drill them out, you'll have to remove the top plate first so that you can get in there with a drill. So there you have it, and we're going to remove the upper press plate and the inside material, and next we'll take off the motor. Now I've cleaned the upper press plate cover, stainless steel. This is an example of the inside production model portion of an upper press plate that's put on all Norwalk juicers. Alright, one thing you want to be sure to do is to remove the ground wire from the old bottom plate before you remove the motor, because this harness is going to come out with the motor. So you will lift the motor up and place it on the new plate. It will be a good idea with a 1/4 inch tapping tool to clean the threads to make it easy for your bolts to go in. So I'll clean a couple of them here so you can see how this is done. Very easy. You need a 1/4 inch tapping tool. It's a little bit snug, and that's why you want to get this in here so your bolts go in really easily. Alright, here we are tapping the last hole. We want to make it easy for the bolts to go in. There we go. Now we'll back that off. And the last step will be to put the motor in place. And bolt it down. We'll get these bolts started by hand. Get that down most of the way by hand. And let's go around to the other side. So we're tightening down the last bolt by hand. And the next step will be to tighten all 4 bolts with the tool, and then install the posts here, 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 and here, and then we'll put the bottom married to the top. Your next step will be to remove the feet. That'll make it easier. Some people call them legs, feet legs, and remove them. And then you remove the flathead screws. And you can see without the feet it's very easy to do. Now, if it's difficult to remove the flathead screws, you can use a cheater bar. Sometimes these flathead screws are very, very tight and you need the cheater bar to break it. And if they won't come out, you need to heat it with a torch and use a different method to take it out, but usually it's as simple as this, using a cheater bar. So there you have the old plate. And the next thing we're going to do is remove the pump and remove the hydraulic cylinder and remove the plate if we're going to replace the bottom plate. Your next step is very simple. Remove the bottom plate and assembly. You lift it up, twist it a little bit to get the hydraulics out, and set it aside. And the next step will be to remove the spacer bars. Because you're going to have to remove these posts with a wrench. The next step is to remove the posts, and I've laid it on its side to enable me to do that. It's not always this easy, but you need the appropriate wrench. And to make this video go a little bit faster, what I'm going to do is loosen all the posts and remove them later. Let's see if I can get this one out without. There we go. So we'll continue with this until we get all the posts out. I want to point out that one reason we don't tighten down the motor until the very last is we need to move it away so that we can put the hydraulic posts in properly. We don't want the motor to be interfering with turning these posts in. Now you want to be sure that your posts are square when you tighten it down. And this one looks like it's going to need a little bit of help. So I'm going to pound that in with a hammer. Needs a little bit of assistance. There we go. Before we put the bottom on, we're going to put in these spacer bars. And this last one's going to be a little more difficult, but you want to get these in before we put the plate on. Now, one reason I put the old original press plate on with the hydraulic reservoir and the pump is to position it so that when I put the new plate on, everything is in the correct place. Now I put a yogurt container and a piece of cardboard under here so this doesn't fall down. And I put a piece of cardboard between the motor and the pump to keep that from falling down. So I've already removed the 2 bolts that hold the pump on, but I'm going to replace those with longer bolts because the solid press plate is thicker. So what we'll do is we'll put these aside with the washers on the longer bolts. And we don't need to replace this one because that's for the reservoir. And we're going to remove the old plate and set that aside. And then we will put the new plate in position. Now the first thing I'm going to do is put the bolt in for the hydraulic reservoir. Tighten that by hand. And then I will put the 2 bolts in for the pump. Tighten that by hand. Now before I tighten everything down with a wrench, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the four flathead screws into the hydraulic posts. This post I'm going to have to push in by hand a little. Let's put this one in first. This is a little easier. And this one by hand. Tighten these all down a little bit later. Now for this one I'm going to use a clamp to pull that post into the correct place so the screw goes in. Tighten as much as I can by hand and then the rest of the way with the Allen wrench. Now I'm going to use what's known as a cheater bar to tighten these down a little more snugly. And then I'm going to tighten the hydraulic reservoir. And the last step is going to be put on the leg height kit. Before I tighten down the motor, I want to make sure there's enough room for the divider plate. So what I'm going to do now is tighten down the 4 bolts. We'll start with these 2 in front, and then we'll get the 2 in behind. And want this to be tight because we're not going to go in here again. Now next, when I've determined there's enough room for the divider plate between the motor and the back, I'm going to tighten down these two bolts, and I put a flashlight there so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to tighten these two bolts down, and you want to make sure they're snug because you don't want to be going back in here again. One of the last steps is to replace the motor divider and put the two screws that hold it in place in tightly on both sides. There we go. Now when you're down to the last step, remember to replace this little piece of cardboard between the motor and the divider plate. This is going to eliminate any vibration that comes from the motor. That's a very important step, and don't forget it if you're doing this work yourself. And one thing you must remember to do is to feed the power cord and harness behind the belt, and this is the top when it's upside down, but under the motor. And this ground wire, it's going to be attached to the bottom when we go to the next step. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this upside down, but I want to point out you never want to turn it in this direction because your motor bolts will fall out, and they're about $20 each. You don't want those to get damaged. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this upside down. I'm attaching the ground wire to the bottom plate. Tighten it down all the way. And there we are. Now I can see that the drive belt pulley on the bottom and the top is not quite perpendicular, so I'm going to adjust that. I need pliers to loosen the Allen wrench. There's the set screw. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pry bar and pry that pulley out until it's perpendicular. There we have it. Took it out about a little more than 1/8 of an inch. And we'll tighten down that set screw and we're ready to go. The very last step, of course, is going to be to glue on the top metal. And because the indentation for the sheet metal is rounded on the corners, what I'm going to do to this sheet metal is snip off a tiny bit of metal and then round it with a file, just a tiny bit on all corners. Very, very tiny, not even 1/8 of an inch. And we'll round that with a quarter and then glue it on, and I have another video showing you how to glue on the top, so I'm not going to bother doing that now. The very last step will be to put the sheet metal on, and then when the sheet metal is on and you line up the screw holes, you're going to tap with a hammer, punch with a hammer, the proper place to drill the screw holes and then tap them with an 832 thread. I show that in another video, so there's no need to do it here. I hope you like what you've seen, and if you did, please tell a friend. If you'd like to contact me, my phone number is 760-753-0321. My email address is developtrust@cox.net, and my webpage is wholehealthfound.com. So greetings, my friends all over the world, and I'll see you in the next video.